in Resident Evil wasn't a virus? What if it wasn't a monster, a zombie, or even a bioweapon? What if the most dangerous thing was a man in a suit, sitting behind a desk, deciding who lives and who dies? Because that's exactly what Victor Gideon was working for. And by the end of Resident Evil Requiem, he says something that completely reframes everything you thought you knew about bioweapons in this universe. He says, with Elpis, all virus-based weapons are useless. The world order will be thrown into chaos. We wanted a weapon. Instead, Spencer gave us Anarchy. Let that sink in for a second. An antivirus, a cure, something designed to save lives, and the villain calls it Anarchy. Why? How? And what does that tell us about the real threat in Resident Evil? That's what we're breaking down today. Every detail, every layer, every implication. Welcome back to the channel. And this is the truth behind Victor Gideon.
With Elpus, all virus-based weapons are useless. The world order would be thrown into chaos.
We wanted a weapon.
Instead, Spencer gave us Anarchy. I will carry his torch and bring his vision to life.
You and Spencer were a means.
Before we get into what Victor was doing at Rhodes Hill, we need to understand who this man actually is, because he's not your typical Resident Evil villain. Most RE villains are scientists obsessed with evolution. They want to transcend humanity. They want godhood. Think Wesker. Think Miranda. Think Birkin. These are people consumed by ego and a twisted dream of what human potential could become. Victor Gideon is different. Victor is not a scientist chasing godhood. He's not some mad genius injecting himself with experimental viruses. He is a strategist, a manipulator, a man who understands one thing better than almost anyone in the Resident Evil universe: power. Not physical power, not biological power, the power of control. Victor is the kind of man who looks at the T virus, the G virus, the mold, the megamycete, and doesn't see monsters. He sees leverage. And that worldview, that philosophy, is exactly what makes him so terrifying. Because monsters you can shoot, tyrants you can fight, but a man who controls the world's most dangerous weapons from the shadows, that's a different kind of enemy entirely. Now let's talk about Rhodes Hill, specifically the Rhodes Hill Chronic Care Center. Because on the surface, it looks exactly like what the name suggests. A medical facility, a place of healing, doctors, patients, clinical hallways. But underneath that facade was something far darker. Victor was conducting T-virus experiments on the people inside that building. Men and women who came seeking medical care, unknowingly becoming test subjects in Victor's obsessive research. And what was he searching for so desperately that he was willing to do this? Elpus. You see, Victor wasn't some rogue arms dealer trying to sell bioweapons to the highest bidder. His obsession was far more specific, and in his own twisted mind, far more noble. Victor was a devoted follower of Oswald Spencer, not just professionally, but ideologically. He believed in Spencer's original vision, that the progenitor virus and everything built from it was the key to the next stage of human evolution. That Spencer's life work was meant to transform humanity into something greater. And Victor believed Elpis was the crown jewel of that vision. Spencer's ultimate achievement, the culmination of everything Umbrella had been working toward. So every experiment, every infected patient, every dark corner of that care center, it was all in service of one goal. Find Elpis, unlock it, complete what Spencer started. Then a young woman named Grace Ashcroft entered the picture. Victor discovered that Grace's blood held something extraordinary, a biological key that could unlock Elpis. She wasn't a random target. She was specifically the person Victor needed. So he did what men like Victor always do. He lured her in, and he took her. That decision is what sets the entire game in motion. That is why Leon Kennedy and the others arrive in Rhodes Hill. That is why the outbreak happens. Everything, every monster, every death, every moment of chaos in that city traces back to one man in a care center, playing God with other people's lives in the name of a dead man's legacy. And the truly chilling part? Victor genuinely believed he was doing the right thing. That is the horror of Victor Gideon. He wasn't driven by greed or political ambition. He was driven by faith, a cold, fanatical, unshakable faith in Spencer's vision. And as history has shown us, people who commit atrocities in the name of a greater cause are often the most dangerous kind of all. But here's where everything gets complicated. Here's where the story of Resident Evil Requiem twists into something genuinely profound. Buried deep within the Rhodes Hill facility, hidden in layers of classified data and forgotten research, was a project that Victor's organization didn't fully understand until it was almost too late. Project Elpis. Elpis was not Victor's project. It was Spencer's. Oswell E. Spencer, the founder of Umbrella, the architect of decades of bioterror, the man responsible for more deaths than perhaps anyone in human history, had, in his final years, created something extraordinary. An antivirus. Not just an antivirus for one strain. Not a cure for the T-virus or the G-virus specifically. Elpis was designed to be a universal neutralizing agent, something capable of countering virtually any virus-based biological weapon ever created. In his final act, Spencer, the man who started it all, tried to end it.
Shutting yourself away in a dark room like this is quite the change for you, after the life you've led.
Life takes unexpected turns, don't you think?
Looking back, do you feel that the choices you've made have contributed to your present circumstances?
Of course. What you sow, you reap. Isn't that the natural order?
So, tell me, Lord Spencer, what would you like the world to know?
The truth. But a short break before we begin, Miss Ashcroft. I'm not a young man. I don't have the energy I once did.
He named it Elpis after the Greek spirit of hope, and the symbolism is deliberate and heartbreaking. In the myth of Pandora's box, when Pandora opened the box and unleashed all the evils of the world into humanity, disease, suffering, hatred, war, only one thing remained inside. Elpis, hope, the last thing left after everything else had been destroyed. Spencer saw himself as Pandora. He knew what he had unleashed on the world. Decades of bioweapons research, the T-virus, the fall of Raccoon City, the countless outbreaks that followed. He knew his legacy was written in death, and so he created Elpis, not to redeem himself in any meaningful way, because redemption for a man like Spencer is a complicated concept, but perhaps to leave something behind that could, eventually, make what he had created obsolete, to pull the last remaining hope out of the box. So when Victor Gideon discovers the truth about Elpis, that his great weapon, his leverage, his entire plan was sitting on top of a project that could nullify every bioweapon in existence, his reaction is not relief. It's fury. And then he says the line that reframes the entire game. With Elpis, all virus-based weapons are useless. The world order will be thrown into chaos. We wanted a weapon. Instead, Spencer gave us anarchy. Now read that again slowly, because every single word matters. All virus-based weapons are useless, not just as weapons, all of them. Every government black site running bioweapons research, every shadow organization building viral strains in secret, every power broker who built their influence on the threat of biological warfare, all of it gone, rendered worthless overnight. The world order will be thrown into chaos. And here is where Victor's logic becomes genuinely chilling, because he's not entirely wrong. The international balance of power, as terrible as it is, depends on leverage. Countries don't go to war with each other openly when both sides have weapons of mass destruction, because the threat of mutual destruction keeps a fragile peace. It's horrifying, but it's how the world actually works. Bioweapons function the same way in the shadows. Organizations, governments, and corporations maintain influence because they have these weapons and others don't. The moment Elpis makes every bioweapon useless, that entire invisible structure of deterrence and leverage collapses. And when that kind of power vacuum appears, historically, catastrophically, the scramble to fill it is never peaceful. We wanted a weapon. Instead, Spencer gave us Anarchy. And there it is. The truth of Victor Gideon laid completely bare. He didn't want peace. He didn't want safety. He wanted control. And Elpis didn't give him control. It destroyed the very foundation that control was built on. And this brings me to what I think is the most important takeaway from Resident Evil Requiem. The theme that the game is actually trying to tell us. Beneath all the monsters and the action and the horror, the real threat in Resident Evil was never the virus. Think about every major outbreak in this franchise. Raccoon City, the Spencer Estate, Los Illuminados, the Baker Ranch, the village. In every single case, every single one, the virus didn't choose to be created. The virus didn't choose a target. The virus didn't decide to wipe out a city or experiment on innocent people. People did. Oswald Spencer created the T-virus. James Marcus weaponized it. Derek Simmons used it as a political assassination tool. Alexia Ashford engineered the Veronica strain for personal ambition. Evelyn was literally a child who just wanted a family, manipulated into becoming a weapon by faceless corporate interests. A virus, on its own, is just biology. It infects, it replicates, it spreads. That's all it knows how to do. It has no malice, no agenda. But give that virus to a Victor Gideon? Give it to a corporation driven by profit? Give it to a government willing to deploy it against civilian populations? Give it to anyone who sees human life as a resource to be exploited? And suddenly biology becomes genocide. It's the same principle as a gun. A firearm sitting on a table is just a mechanical object. It has no power of its own, no intent, no cruelty. But put it in the hands of someone with fear, hatred, greed, or ideology, and it becomes the instrument of tragedy. The gun didn't pull its own trigger. The person did. Bioweapons are no different. And this is why Victor's reaction to Elpis is so revealing. Because if the real problem in Resident Evil was the viruses themselves, then Elpis would bring peace. An antivirus that neutralizes any biological weapon? That should be the end of the story. That should be humanity's salvation. But Victor tells us the truth. The virus was never the real problem. The people controlling the viruses are the problem. And you cannot create an antivirus for human ambition. You cannot develop a cure for greed. There is no vaccine against the hunger for power. And this makes Spencer's final act all the more tragic. Spencer spent his entire life believing he could engineer a better humanity. That's what the progenitor virus was originally about. Selecting the survivors, creating a new kind of human, building a world that only the strongest could inherit. It was monstrous. It was delusional. But in Spencer's mind, it was visionary. And then at the end, after watching everything he built turn into catastrophe, after seeing Raccoon City, after being betrayed by his own creation in Westgear, he tried one last time to engineer a solution. He created Elpis, the antidote to everything he had helped create. The hope that maybe, if the weapons were gone, the killing would stop. But Spencer made the same mistake he always made. He thought the problem was biological. He thought if you removed the virus, you removed the threat. But Victor Gideon's response proves that wrong. The moment Elpis is discovered, Victor doesn't see a cure. He sees a power vacuum. He sees instability. He sees the world without his leverage, scrambling and violent and uncontrollable. Spencer built Pandora's box. And then he thought he could fix everything just by stuffing hope back inside. But the evils were already out. The organizations were already built. The ambitions were already formed. The governments already knew what bioweapons could do. The knowledge of how to create them, deploy them, weaponize them. That knowledge doesn't disappear because Elpis exists.
Looks like it.
It just means the race to find new weapons, new methods, new leverage begins all over again. Spencer's hope was genuine, but it was naive, because the real enemy was never something that lived in a vial. So where does this leave us? If Elpis is released into the world, as one of the game's endings explores, the short-term result might look like progress. Bioweapons become ineffective. The immediate threat dissolves. People like Victor lose their leverage. But the world Victor described, the chaos, the anarchy, that doesn't just disappear. Because the people who built their power on bioweapons don't just quietly accept defeat. They adapt. They research. They find new methods, new viruses that Elpus can't reach yet, new ways to maintain dominance. And the cycle continues. This is the tragedy at the heart of Resident Evil's entire 30-year story. It's not about any single outbreak. It's not about any single virus or any single monster. It's about a world where human beings repeatedly choose power over peace, control over compassion, and profit over life. The T virus, the G virus, the C virus, the mold, Elpis itself, these are just the chapters of that story. The story itself is about us, about what we do with knowledge, about who we trust with power, about whether humanity is capable of choosing differently when the moment comes. And Resident Evil Requiem asks that question louder than perhaps any entry in the franchise ever has. Victor Gideon isn't scary because he's a monster. He's scary because he makes sense. His logic is cruel and cold and utterly ruthless, but you can follow it. You can see exactly how a real person becomes a Victor Gideon, how ambition curdles into control, how control becomes obsession, how obsession justifies anything. The real villain of Resident Evil was never a virus. It was always the person holding the vial. That's everything on Victor Gideon and what he was really trying to accomplish at Rhodes Hill. If this video made you think differently about the story of Resident Evil Requiem, or about the franchise as a whole, drop it in the comments. I want to know what you think. Was Spencer's hope in Elpis genuinely noble? Or was it always doomed to fail in a world full of Victor Gideons? Hit the like button if you enjoyed this breakdown, and subscribe if you want more deep dives into Resident Evil lore, because we are just getting started with Requiem's story. I'll see you in the next one.
Huh.